If you have recently brought your first houseplant home and watched it slowly decline despite your best efforts, you are not alone. Millions of people every year face the same frustrating experience. A plant that looked healthy at the store begins to yellow, droop, or drop its leaves within weeks of arriving in their home. And in almost every single case, the root cause is the same. Not a pest, not the wrong soil, not even the wrong light. The biggest mistake beginners make with watering indoor plants is watering on a fixed schedule instead of watering based on what the plant actually needs. This one habit, the idea that every plant needs water once a week or every 3 days or every Monday without fail, is responsible for more dead houseplants than any other single factor. It sounds logical at first. Plants need water. You give them water on a regular basis. But indoor plants do not live by the calendar. They live by their environment, their soil, their pot size, their root system, and the season. And once you understand this, everything about caring for houseplants becomes clearer, easier, and far more successful. Let us start from the beginning, because understanding why this mistake happens is just as important as knowing how to fix it. When most people think about how to water houseplants properly, they look for a simple rule. They search online for things like how often should I water my pothose, or what is the best watering schedule for succulents, and they find articles that give them a number. Once a week, every 10 days, twice a month. These numbers feel reassuring. They feel like a plan. And beginners, who are already overwhelmed by the idea of keeping a living thing alive, cling to that plan. The problem is that those numbers are averages at best and fiction at worst. A pothose sitting in a terracotta pot near a sunny south-facing window in a dry, heated apartment in January will need water far more often than a pothose sitting in a glazed ceramic pot in a humid bathroom with indirect light. Both are pothose. Both are technically the same plant. But their water needs are completely different, and applying the same schedule to both will hurt at least one of them. The most common outcome of fixed schedule watering is overwatering. And overwatering is by a significant margin the number one cause of death for indoor plants. When you water too frequently, the soil stays wet for extended periods of time. Roots sitting in constantly wet soil begin to suffocate because roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. When oxygen cannot reach the roots, the plant cannot take up nutrients. Then a secondary problem sets in: fungal growth. Root rot, caused by fungi like Phytophthora and Pythium, thrives in wet anaerobic conditions and can destroy a root system within days. By the time you see the symptoms above soil, which are yellowing leaves, mushy stems, a foul smell from the pot, or a plant that wilts even though the soil is wet, the damage is often already severe. What makes overwatering so insidious for beginners is that its symptoms look almost exactly like underwatering. Wilting, yellowing, leaf drop, these happen in both cases. So the beginner sees a wilting plant, assumes it needs more water, gives it more water, and accelerates the exact problem they were trying to solve. This is the trap, and it is almost impossible to escape if you do not know how to actually check whether your plant needs water before you reach for the watering can. So, how do you know when to water indoor plants correctly? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple once you hear it. You check the soil, not the surface. The soil a few inches down. The single most reliable technique for avoiding overwatering and underwatering at the same time is the finger test. You push your finger 1 to 2 inches into the soil and feel whether it is moist or dry. If it is still moist, you wait. If it is dry, or approaching dryness depending on the plant, you water. That is the whole system. No calendar, no app, no reminders, just your finger and the soil. For most tropical houseplants, including pothos, philodendrons, peace lilies, and monsteras, you want to water when the top 1 to 2 inches of soil have dried out. For succulents, cacti, and other drought-tolerant plants, you want to wait until the soil is almost completely dry throughout the pot before adding any water. For moisture-loving plants like ferns, calatheas, and nerve plants, you want to keep the soil more consistently moist but never soggy. Learning the specific needs of your plant and then checking the soil against those needs is the fundamental skill of how to care for indoor plants without killing them. There is another tool that many experienced plant owners swear by, and that is the lift test. When you pick up a pot right after watering, it feels heavy. As the water is absorbed or evaporates, the pot becomes lighter. With a little practice, you can feel by the weight of the pot alone whether the soil still has significant moisture in it or whether it has dried out enough to water again. This technique works especially well for smaller pots and for hanging plants where sticking your finger in is less convenient. Beyond the watering frequency question, there is also the question of how to water indoor plants deeply and effectively. Many beginners make a secondary mistake of giving their plants small sips of water rather than watering them thoroughly. When you water a little at a time, only the top inch or two of soil gets wet. The deeper roots, which are often the most developed and important part of the root system, never receive moisture. Over time, this encourages shallow surface root growth, which makes the plant more vulnerable to drought and less anchored in the pot. The correct way to water most houseplants is to water slowly and thoroughly until water flows freely from the drainage holes at the bottom of the pot. Then you stop, let it drain completely, and empty the saucer if any water has collected there. That last point is critical. Leaving a plant sitting in a saucer full of water is functionally the same as leaving it in wet soil. The water wicks back up through the drainage holes and keeps the bottom of the root zone perpetually saturated. This is one of those small habits that people think is helping their plant stay hydrated, but is actually contributing to root rot. When you water, water fully, drain fully, and keep the saucer dry between waterings. Water quality is another factor that beginners often overlook when thinking about how to improve their houseplant watering routine. Tap water in many areas contains chlorine, chloramines, and in hard water regions, high levels of calcium and magnesium. Most plants tolerate tap water perfectly well, but some sensitive plants, particularly calatheas, spider plants, and certain ferns, can develop brown leaf tips or spotting in response to the minerals and chemicals in tap water. If you notice this happening and you have already ruled out watering frequency as a cause, consider switching to filtered water, collected rainwater, or simply leaving your tap water in an open container overnight before using it. This allows chlorine to off-gas and the water to reach room temperature, which also avoids the stress that cold water can cause to tropical plant roots. The temperature of the water matters more than most people realize. Very cold water, straight from a cold tap in winter, can shock the roots of tropical plants that are accustomed to warm soil temperatures. Room temperature water is always preferable, and slightly warm water is even better for plants that come from tropical or subtropical climates. Seasonal changes also play a massive role in how to adjust your plant watering schedule throughout the year. In spring and summer, most houseplants are in their active growing period. They are photosynthesizing more, transpiring more water through their leaves, and actively building new tissue. This means they consume water faster and need watering more frequently. In autumn and winter, growth slows dramatically or stops entirely for many species. The plant is in a period of rest, its metabolic activity drops, and its water requirements decrease significantly. A plant you are watering once a week in July might only need water once every 2 or 3 weeks in December. Continuing to water at the same summer frequency through winter is one of the most common reasons people lose plants during the cold months, even when light and temperature seem fine. Pot material and size are also directly tied to how often you will need to water, and they're factors that beginner plant owners rarely think about when setting up their first plants. Terracotta pots are porous and breathable. They allow moisture and air to pass through their walls, which means the soil dries out faster, which is excellent for succulents, cacti, and any plant prone to root rot, but requires more frequent watering attention. Glazed ceramic, plastic, and fiberglass pots are non-porous. They hold moisture longer, which suits moisture-loving tropical plants, but requires extra caution to avoid overwatering. A plant in a 4-inch plastic pot and an identical plant in a 4-inch terracotta pot sitting side by side in the same conditions might have completely different watering needs on any given day. Pot size in relation to plant size is equally important. A common beginner mistake is putting a small plant in a large pot because it looks nice or because you want to give the roots room to grow. But when a small root system sits in a large volume of soil, most of that soil has no roots in it to absorb the moisture. It just stays wet for a very long time, and that perpetually wet, rootless soil becomes a breeding ground for fungal problems. Always choose a pot that is appropriately sized for the plant, typically only 1 to 2 inches larger in diameter than the current root ball, and move up gradually as the plant grows. Drainage holes are non-negotiable for the vast majority of houseplants. Pots without drainage holes are one of the single biggest structural causes of overwatering because there is no way for excess water to escape. Water sits at the bottom of the pot, saturating the lower root zone constantly. Some experienced plant owners use pots without drainage holes successfully by being extremely precise about how much water they add and by using well-aerated soil mixes that dry out more quickly. But for beginners who are still learning to read their plants and their soil, always use pots with at least one drainage hole. It gives you a buffer against your own mistakes and makes the whole system more forgiving. Soil mix is the last major factor in this entire equation, and it is one that is deeply connected to watering success. The standard potting mixes sold at most garden centers are designed to hold moisture because that suits the broadest possible range of plants and conditions. But for many popular indoor plants, particularly those with roots that are prone to rot, like monsteras, pothos, snake plants, and most succulents, a standard moisture-retaining potting mix holds too much water for too long. Adding perlite, a lightweight volcanic mineral that improves drainage and aeration, to your potting mix is one of the simplest upgrades you can make to your plant care routine. A mix of roughly 60 to 70% standard potting soil and 30 to 40% perlite dramatically improves drainage, allows roots to access more oxygen, and makes overwatering far less likely even when your watering timing is slightly off. Understanding the signs of both overwatering and underwatering is the final piece of this education. Overwatered plants typically show yellowing lower leaves, soft or mushy stems near the base, a soil surface that may develop algae or mold, a sour or musty smell from the pot, and roots that appear brown, slimy, or disintegrated when removed from the pot. Underwatered plants show dry, crispy leaf edges, leaves that curl inward, soil that pulls away from the edges of the pot as it shrinks, and a pot that feels extremely light when lifted. Wilting can occur in both cases, which is why checking the soil before drawing any conclusions is so essential. If you suspect you have been overwatering a plant, the recovery process involves stopping watering immediately, moving the plant to a brighter spot to encourage faster soil drying, and improving airflow around the pot. If the plant is severely affected, you may need to unpot it. Gently remove as much of the wet soil as possible, trim any visibly rotten roots with clean scissors, allow the root ball to air dry for a few hours, and repot into fresh, dry, well-draining soil. Recovery is possible in many cases if root rot has not spread to more than half of the root system, but it requires patience and a complete reset of your watering habits. One more element worth addressing is misting, because it is a topic that causes genuine confusion among beginners who are trying to increase humidity for their tropical houseplants. Misting the leaves of your plants is not an effective substitute for proper watering, and it does very little to meaningfully raise humidity in a room. What misting can do, when done excessively or when leaves stay wet for long periods, is encourage fungal disease and bacterial infections on the foliage itself. If your goal is to raise humidity for humidity-loving plants like calatheas, ferns, or orchids, a pebble tray with water placed beneath the pot, grouping plants together so they benefit from each other's transpiration, or a small humidifier nearby will all be far more effective and far safer than daily misting. It is also worth thinking about the role of light in your watering equation. Light and water are directly connected in ways that beginners rarely consider. A plant in bright light photosynthesizes faster, uses energy more quickly, and therefore consumes water more rapidly than the same plant in low light. If you move a plant from a dim corner to a bright windowsill, its water needs will increase noticeably. Conversely, if you move a plant to a darker spot because it was getting scorched, you need to water it less. Anytime you change a plant's light conditions, reassess your watering approach from scratch rather than continuing on the same schedule. The simplest and most powerful shift you can make in how you approach watering your indoor plants is to move from a time-based mindset to a condition-based mindset. Stop asking yourself when you last watered. Start asking yourself what the soil feels like right now. That one change in thinking from the calendar to the soil is the difference between a beginner who loses plant after plant and a beginner who becomes a confident, capable plant parent within their very first year. Your plants do not know what day it is. They only know whether they are thirsty. Learn to listen to them and they will thrive.